Welcome to Prince Shorthand House, transcription number 2728 at the rate 80 words per minute. Kailash Chandra Volume 2. Be ready. Start. Mr. Vice Chairman, Sir, I rise to support the Plantations Labour Amendment Bill brought up by the government for our consideration. Sir, the sad plight of millions of toiling people who sweat on various plantations in the country to earn valuable foreign exchange for us is really too much to be expressed in words. These workers live and work in most inhuman and pitiable conditions. These plantations include tea, coffee, cinchona, rubber, etc. And as we know, tea alone is one of the major foreign exchange earners of our country. But sir, it is indeed most regrettable that notwithstanding a lapse of 62 years since our independence, these workers who earn crores and crores of rupees by way of foreign exchange have to live in most miserable conditions. They live in houses that are most insecure and collapse frequently, and when these workers die as a result of these collapses, their guardians or their dependents do not get even due compensation for the loss that they have to bear. Unhygienic living in distant and far-flung areas compounded with lack of medical and educational facilities make their life utterly miserable. These plantation workers have to live in abject poverty like slaves of their employers. And as we know, most of these plantations are still foreign owned establishments, last vestiges of the colonial rule, the British rule, and as I said, it is a matter of deep regret for all of us that despite enacting an act, the Plantations Labour Act 2001, we have not yet been able to effect any improvement in their conditions. I think the employers alone are not responsible for their miserable condition. We are also as much responsible as they are, because although we could enforce the enactment and we could improve their conditions much earlier, we have failed in doing so. Sir, on the 9th May 2003, this House, the Rajya Sabha, decided that a joint committee should be appointed to look into the desired amendment and put up a draft as early as possible for our consideration. On the 26th May 2003, the Lok Sabha also adopted our resolution, our motion, with the result that a 45-member committee in which 15 representatives were from the Rajya Sabha and 30 from the Lok Sabha was appointed to look into the matter. This committee was to submit its report on the first day of the 5th session of the Rajya Sabha, that was in 2003, but this committee had to be granted 3 extensions and the report was ultimately available on the 3rd March 2005. At that time, as we all know, the so-called JP's movement of total revolution was at its peak. Within 2 or 3 months, the national emergency had to be declared, and during the emergency, priorities had changed and we could not just effect this desired improvement at that time, and we could not bring about this legislation. And then the Janta rule and the Lok Dal rule. For 30 months they were in power, but they too, although they are to pose to be the champions of the downtrodden, and the workers failed to deliver the goods, and that is why today we are going to consider the report of that committee that was presented to the government in 2005. Therefore, we are also equally responsible for not ameliorating their conditions and their plight. The committee had to consider 120 memoranda giving views and suggestions from various unions and associations, and 59 witnesses appeared before the committee, and that committee itself came to the conclusion that in various areas even the barest minimum facilities such as arrangement for supply of wholesome drinking water, latrines, urinals, provision of qualified doctors had not been provided, though these amenities are a must under the Act. The Act has been there, but we could not enforce it. We could not implement it only because the employers did not want it. They did not want to give to the workers due justice. Inadequacy of punishments that are awarded under the Act is one of the main impediments standing in the way of implementation of various welfare measures. Courts generally take a lenient view of the offences under the Act, and they let off the employers who are offenders with lighter punishment, which generally amounts to a fine of ₹100. So the committee suggested amendment to section 36 of the Act. An employer is required to provide these workers living accommodation, but generally, in spite of the fact that the government gives loans and subsidies to the employers for construction of houses, progress in regard to these constructions is very poor. As I said earlier, very unhygienic and insecure houses are there where these people have to live. Even compensation to the workers in the event of house collapse is not given. Stop. Next, transcription number 28. Be ready. Start. Mr. Vice Chairman, I was speaking about the need for developing a strong UN delegation. I wish that the Honorable Prime Minister would give his attention to this aspect of the matter, particularly in view of the fact that in the next decade or two, politics all over the world would take on a complex character, and it is necessary that men are trained from now on for taking part in international affairs. In the UK and the United States, such delegations are built with men who have wide knowledge of international affairs, and there should be other qualification for a man to be included in such a delegation. In this connection, I should also like to mention that it is time for government to develop sound conventions regarding the conduct of foreign affairs. In the United States, they have accepted the principle of bipartisan consultation on important affairs of policy. For example, when President Kennedy stood for election, President Eisenhower, even during the period of the conduct of the campaign of President Kennedy, kept him informed about major developments in foreign affairs. We have seen our government sending troops out of this country to the Congo, and at that time I had raised the point that before troops left our country for any assignments of an unusual character like the Congo assignment, members of the opposition should be informally consulted. There will be no question of any leakage of information whatever if leaders in the opposition are consulted on important aspects of foreign policy. The Consultative Committee of the External Affairs Ministry does go some way to meet the needs of exchanging information about foreign affairs, but the informal consultation of the kind that I mentioned, where the leader of the opposition and leaders of other parties are called and told by the Prime Minister about unusual developments, would strengthen the conviction that the foreign policy of the country has the support not only of the Congress party but also of the entire country. I was speaking about our external publicity, and it is a subject on which I think I can speak with some confidence, and I have been an old time newspaperman in this country. The material which is sent out to foreign countries is extremely scrappy and useless. There is included in these messages some statement of what this minister was saying somewhere. We are trying to give publicity to ministerial activities, and it is inevitable that some such publicity should be given because ministers are in charge of the government, but one abroad does not get a real idea of what is happening in the country. I would like to suggest for the consideration of the External Affairs Ministry that they should send a fortnightly assignment of what is happening in India, written dispassionately, not to please a minister or to highlight something that he has done, but to give an objective assessment of what is going on in the country. In the old days, when the British government was in existence, such fortnightly reports used to be sent by various state governments, and I think a beginning can be made in that direction in this matter. The other point I would like to suggest is that publicity is a complicated and technical matter. The Foreign Service, as it is constituted today, does not have sufficient training in publicity. The Estimates Committee, which went into the demands of the External Affairs Ministry, mentioned about the methods of training which have been adopted, but since our Foreign Service men are not trained in publicity work, and one sees, for example, that a lot of confusion has arisen in the United States over Ambassador Nehru's statement, I think the External Affairs Ministry might well set up a committee of members of Parliament who are conversant with external publicity and some newspaper men to advise the External Affairs Ministry from time to time. I do not think that the committee will ask for information which is confidential or secret, but they can assist the newspapermen. There are a handful of competent men who would be willing to serve on the committee in an advisory capacity. They would be able to tell the External Affairs Ministry what should be done in order that our news publicity abroad is better. I might mention also that the Estimates Committee had recommended the creation of a cultural cell. Sir, to my mind, we have also to be clear in our mind regarding the objective of rural industrialization. Do we mean to have only diversification of rural economy, and are we going to have rural industrialization only in order to give some help to those who find themselves unemployed during a certain period of the year? Are we aiming at utilizing local resources and meeting local needs through diversification of rural economy, or have we a more fundamental objective in mind when we are trying to industrialize the rural areas? Without this, I am afraid rural industrialization will not be possible. Stop.